The sea had always been Elias's life. Born into a long line of fishermen in the quiet coastal village of Elwyn Bay, his world was built around tides, nets, and silence. But times had changed. The fish were fewer, the storms more unpredictable, and the debt collectors more relentless. On that morning, the ocean looked calm, almost too calm. Elias, with weather-worn hands and eyes that had forgotten what hope looked like, prepared his old boat, the Alina, for one more run. He whispered a promise to himself. Just one good haul. That's all I need. By noon, he was far beyond his usual boundary, chasing rumors of schools that moved with the warmth of the deep currents. He dropped his net wider than he'd ever dared. When he pulled it up, heavy, tangled, and thrashing, he knew he'd caught something big. But as he looked over the side, he froze. Among the wriggling silver glints of fish, something else moved, larger, smoother, and bleeding. A dolphin. Its black, intelligent eye met his. It didn't thrash, it didn't scream, it just stared. And in that stare, Elias felt the weight of a mistake that couldn't be undone. The net lay heavy on the deck, not just with fish and rope, but with something far heavier. Guilt. Elias dropped to his knees beside the dolphin. Its body was slick and glistening with salt water and blood. A gash ran across its side where the net had bitten deep. It had stopped moving, but its eye still stared, wide, glassy, and unmoving. That unblinking gaze made Elias's chest tighten, with a kind of pain he hadn't felt in years, not since he buried his wife beneath the olive tree on the hill behind his house. He touched the dolphin gently, uncertain why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was remorse. Its skin was still warm. "I didn't mean to," Elias whispered, but the sea was the only one listening. The gulls circled overhead, cawing like mourners at a funeral. The waves tapped gently against the hull, as if scolding him for a line crossed. He stood, walked to the edge, and lowered the dolphin's body back into the ocean. It sank slowly, weightless in water, but Elias felt it, like he had just let go of a secret he'd never be able to bury. That night, back at shore, he didn't even unload the fish. He just tied the boat, walked past the dock lights, and kept his head down. At home, the silence was louder than ever. He poured himself a drink, but the bottle trembled in his hand. He stared out the window toward the sea. A flash of something pale, like a shape beneath the surface, flickered in the moonlight. But it vanished before his tired eyes could focus. He told himself it was nothing, just guilt playing tricks. But deep down, something had changed. And the sea never forgets. The next morning, Elias's boat rocked gently in the dock, moaning against its ropes as if reluctant to leave. The wind carried a salty chill, sharper than usual. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd lain in bed with his eyes open, watching the shadows creep across the ceiling like ghosts. He debated staying home, maybe taking a break. But the debt collectors didn't care about guilt or dolphins or the ache in his chest. They wanted payments. So he grabbed his thermos, tightened his coat, and walked down to the shore like every other day. Except this wasn't like every other day. As he untied the boat and started the engine, he noticed something odd. A shape was floating just offshore, sleek, gray, and still. His heart sank. Not again. He steered toward it carefully, heart thudding in his throat. But as he approached, the shape moved. It circled his boat, then dove. Elias stood frozen at the wheel. It wasn't another dead dolphin. It was alive. It resurfaced near the stern. A dolphin, smaller than the one he'd killed, but unmistakably of the same kind. It hovered near the surface, watching him. Its eyes met his. And stayed. Elias didn't believe in magic. He didn't believe in omens. But in that moment, he knew. It was the mate. The dolphin was alone now, just like him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, as Elias slowly turned the boat toward deeper waters, the dolphin followed. At first, Elias tried to ignore it. He focused on his equipment, lowering the nets, checking the engine. But every time he looked up, there it was, just a few feet away, keeping pace with the boat like a shadow on the waves. It was impossible to work like this, Elias muttered under his breath, frustrated and unnerved. "Go away," he said aloud. But the dolphin didn't leave. All day it stayed with him, sometimes ahead of the boat, sometimes beside it. Never far. By the time he hauled his last net, mostly empty, and turned the boat back to shore, the dolphin was still there. When he reached the dock, it hovered near the pilings, watching. He stepped onto the dock, turned, and looked back. Still watching. That night, he didn't touch his dinner. He sat at his table in silence, the flickering lamp casting long shadows across his walls. He thought of the dolphin's eyes. The same eyes. Not accusing. Just waiting. The following day came cloaked in a heavy fog, thick like wool, swallowing sound and sight alike. Elias stood on the dock, hesitant. He'd sailed in storms before, faced towering waves and lashing winds. But this silence was worse. The sea wasn't angry today. It was mourning. He paused, eyes scanning the mist. Somewhere beneath, it lay the open water, and maybe, if the world hadn't changed overnight, that dolphin. A shiver crept down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or the memory. He boarded the boat, started the engine, and eased out of the harbor. The sound of the motor echoed strangely in the fog, muffled and distant, like it didn't belong in this world. As he moved farther from shore, he kept glancing sideways. Part of him hoped the dolphin wouldn't return. But it did. Breaking through. The fog like a silent ghost, the dolphin surfaced beside the boat with barely a ripple. It didn't leap or splash. It just kept pace. Steady. Constant. Elias gripped the wheel tighter. "Why are you here?" he muttered. The dolphin didn't answer. But somehow, it didn't need to. Hours passed. He lowered his nets and drifted, barely catching anything. His mind wasn't on the job. He found himself remembering things, fragments from long ago. The first time his father took him fishing. The day he dropped out of school to work full-time. His mother's voice when she said, "This sea takes more than it gives, Elias." She was right. By afternoon, the fog began to lift, revealing a pale sun and glassy waves. And still, the dolphin remained. That evening, as he returned, Elias saw something strange. Children stood on the dock, pointing at the water. A few tourists had gathered, snapping photos. The dolphin, curious but calm, swam near the pilings. The locals began to whisper. "They say dolphins don't do that unless they're trying to say something. It's been with him 2 days now. Strange, isn't it? He killed one. Maybe this one wants revenge." Elias heard every word. He said nothing. That night, in the dark of his small kitchen, Elias opened the old wooden box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were a few photographs, a dried piece of seaweed from his father's boat, and a worn, folded letter his mother had written before she passed. He held it in his rough hands, read it again and again. The last line stayed with him. "We all carry our own ghosts, Elias, but some will follow you until you face them." Outside, the sea whispered against the rocks, and somewhere in that dark water, a dolphin waited. The morning sun broke gently over the horizon, spilling amber light across the waves like liquid gold. But Elias didn't notice it. He sat on the edge of his small boat, nets coiled beside him, staring into the water like it might speak. And maybe it already had. The dolphin had returned again. It didn't dance or dive. It simply swam, as always, just within reach, as if tethered to his presence by something more than instinct. Elias tossed a piece of fish overboard, not as bait, but as something like an offering. The dolphin didn't take it. "You're not hungry," Elias murmured. "You're waiting." It was true. The dolphin was patient, quiet, like a soul not yet crossed over. and that scared him. The boat creaked softly as he drifted toward deeper water, where the seabed was riddled with forgotten wrecks and tangled ropes. He hadn't fished there in years, it was risky. But something about the dolphin's constant company made him feel protected. He dropped the nets and waited. The ocean was still, so quiet that he could hear the faint whistling of the dolphin beneath the surface. Not loud enough to understand, but enough to feel. And then, it happened. The net pulled hard, sharper than it should have. Elias stood quickly, gripping the line, expecting a tangle or rock. But no, something was moving. Heavy, alive. With a sudden lurch, the boat tilted slightly. He struggled, pulling, winding, breathing heavily. Then the water broke, and in the middle of the tangle rose a shape that made his heart stop. It was a turtle. Massive, ancient, wrapped in discarded fishing lines, seaweed, and one of Elias's own nets. He dropped to his knees. Not again. The turtle was still alive, barely. Its flippers moved weakly, its eyes glossy with exhaustion. And that's when he saw the dolphin. It swam closer now, circling the trapped turtle, clicking rapidly, urgent, almost pleading. Elias didn't think. He grabbed his knife and with shaking hands leaned over the boat's edge. Carefully, he sliced through the ropes. One by one. The dolphin swam tighter circles, occasionally brushing the turtle's shell as if encouraging it to hold on. Finally, with the last of the net free, Elias stepped back, breath ragged, arms soaked. The turtle floated for a moment, unmoving. Then it kicked. Once, twice, and slowly sank into the deep, finally free. Elias collapsed against the deck, staring at the sky, eyes wet but not from the sea spray. And the dolphin. It rose beside the boat, closer than ever before. Their eyes met. Just for a moment. In that silence, something passed between them. Not words. Not even thought. Just understanding. As if the dolphin had brought him here. Not for the catch, but for the chance to save something this time. Something he hadn't done before. That evening, Elias didn't sail straight home. He drifted, thinking, remembering, feeling a quiet ache in his chest that wasn't pain, but something close to peace. And somewhere beneath his boat, the last dolphin swam, not as a ghost, but as a guide. The next morning brought a calm sea and a restless heart. Elias stood at the end of the dock, coffee in hand, staring into the water like it might offer him answers. But the surface gave nothing, only the faint shimmer of early sun and the gentle rise of the tide. Behind him, the village was waking up. Children laughed in the distance. An old radio played a love song from another generation. Nets were being mended. Engines coughed to life. Life was moving forward as it always did. But Elias, he wasn't sure where he stood anymore. The dolphin hadn't appeared today. And somehow, its absence was louder than its presence. He boarded his boat anyway. As he untied the ropes, his hands hesitated. His eyes shifted to the spot where the dolphin usually surfaced. Nothing. He started the motor, slower than usual, and drifted away from shore. Every few minutes, he'd glance over the side, looking for that silver flash. That quiet companion. But the sea remained silent. For the first time in days, Elias felt alone. Out on the water, he didn't drop the nets. Instead, he sat on the edge of the boat, legs dangling, and pulled out a photograph from his coat pocket. Faded and creased. His father, young and proud, arms slung around Elias's shoulders. A fish dangling from their hands. Elias couldn't have been more than 10. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "You don't just take from the sea, son. You owe her something every time." He hadn't understood it then. But now he did. Tears welled in his eyes, not the sharp burning kind, but the slow heavy ones that come from years of silence. Years of pretending the weight wasn't there. He whispered, "I'm sorry." To the sea. To the dolphin. To himself. Just as he folded the photo away, something brushed the side of the boat. A ripple. Then another. And then, breaking the surface like a secret, came the dolphin. Slow. Graceful. Watching. Elias didn't move. He simply stared. The dolphin swam around the boat once, then again, closer. Then it dove. Deep. And came up with a long strand of green seaweed. It placed it gently on the edge of the boat, like an offering. Elias stared at it, heart pounding. And then he laughed, a short, breathless sound that cracked the silence. "You're unbelievable," he muttered. The dolphin clicked once, then rolled on its side, waiting. And Elias, now understanding, picked up his net. Not to take, but to clean. For the next hour, he pulled out discarded ropes, tangled plastics, and shattered traps, ghosts of careless fishermen, dragged from the seabed by the dolphin itself. It brought him broken bottles, tattered lines, hooks, trash, and he cleaned. Not because anyone asked, but because something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a fisherman anymore. He was a witness, a guardian, a man seeking redemption. That night, as the sun sank into the sea, Elias watched the dolphin disappear beneath the horizon again. But this time, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt chosen. The wind whispered that night. Elias lay in his cot aboard the boat, docked gently near the shore, but sleep refused to come. The wooden beams creaked softly above him, and the distant sounds of waves echoed like voices he couldn't decipher. In his mind, he saw the dolphin again. Not just its eyes or its circling movements, but its weightless silence, its knowing presence. It wasn't just an animal, it was a memory, a message, a wound and a salve all at once. At dawn, he rose. But this time, instead of heading toward the fishing waters, Elias followed the path the dolphin had taken the day before, toward the deeper edge of the bay, where old legends said the sea held secrets. The air thickened as he moved farther out. The waters grew darker, colder, quieter. And then, like a vision, there it was again. The dolphin. Waiting. Elias killed the engine, and the silence that followed was almost holy. The dolphin swam around the boat twice, then paused, floating beside him. Its tail brushed the surface slowly, hypnotically, and then it dove. Elias leaned forward. Moments passed. Then, like an unspooled thread, it returned, dragging something behind it. A tangled mass of netting, but not just netting, caught within it. Bones, small ones, a turtle's shell, a seabird's skeleton. And the worst, a dolphin calf. Its tiny jaw still caught in a plastic ring. Elias's breath caught. His chest tightened. This was what the sea had been hiding. This was the weight the living dolphin had been carrying. He reached down and, with trembling hands, pulled the mass aboard. The stench of salt and decay rose up, but he didn't flinch. He knelt beside the remains, heart pounding like waves in a storm. The dolphin surfaced again, watching, waiting. And Elias broke. Tears poured freely now, not silent, but heaving. Raw sobs that came from someplace deeper than regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered again and again. "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" The dolphin swam closer, gently bumped its head against the hull. Not in anger. In acknowledgement. Elias spent the rest of the day in silence. He buried the calf on a small, uninhabited island nearby, made a cross from driftwood, placed seashells around it like prayers. As he stood there, the dolphin floated just offshore, watching. The sky blushed orange and pink as the sun lowered itself again, and Elias spoke aloud, for the first time in years, with full conviction. "I'll never fish these waters again, not like before, not to take, only to heal. Goodbye." Dolphin leapt just once, a graceful arc against the fading light. It was an answer, and it was enough. Days passed. But something in Elias had changed. Permanently. Every morning, he woke before the sun, not to set his nets or bait his lines, but to drift silently along the coastline. He no longer cast his gear into the water. Instead, he watched, listened, took notes in an old water-stained journal he hadn't touched in years. He began documenting the movement of fish schools, the tides, the silence between storms, and most of all, the dolphins. They began appearing in greater numbers now. Not many, not loud, just present. Shadowy shapes beneath his boat, the occasional glint of a dorsal fin. But one remained closer than all the rest. The lone dolphin. The mate. The silent witness to death. And now, the quiet guide to something deeper. Elias named her Kaya, a name from an old sailor's tale that meant from the sea. It felt right. It felt earned. Each morning, Kaya would meet him beyond the cove, circling his boat 3 times before swimming alongside him for hours. Sometimes she'd breach just beside the bow, other times she swam beneath him, silent as memory. Elias stopped bringing bait altogether. Instead, he brought tools, knives, hooks, rope, not to harm, but to free. One morning, Kaya brought him something else, a floating piece of plastic net, wrapped tightly around a rock, embedded with barnacles and shards of glass. It floated like a message, jagged and broken. Elias pulled it aboard gently. He understood. This was his new purpose. Word of the Dolphin fisherman began to spread among the coastal towns. Some laughed, said Elias had lost his mind. Others came to see him, curiosity painted across their faces like children trying to remember dreams they once believed. Elias didn't care for their words. But one morning, a young boy approached the dock, barefoot, sunburned, no older than 10. In his hands, a tangled bird with plastic wrapped around its wings. "I didn't know who else to bring it to," the boy said, voice trembling. Elias kneeled, took the bird, and gently cut the bindings. "Away!" He didn't say a word, just nodded. The boy smiled, tears in his eyes. The moment spread. More came, children first, then families, then strangers with bags full of trash they'd collected from the beaches. They didn't ask for advice. They didn't offer praise. They just came, because they felt it too. The shift, the sorrow, the redemption waiting, like morning beneath the tide. One night, Elias returned to the island where he'd buried the dolphin calf. He lit a lantern and sat beside the small grave, the cross still standing, though weathered now. "I made a promise," he said aloud, "and I'll keep it. Not just for you, but for every creature that slips beneath these waves, unseen." Kaya surfaced beside the island, her breath a soft exhale in the dusk. It felt like a benediction. That night, Elias didn't sleep aboard his boat. He slept on the island, next to the grave, because that's where the story had changed, and where his redemption had begun. The morning sky bloomed in crimson and amber, casting long shadows across the small island. Elias awoke to the rhythm of the tide brushing the shore like a lullaby. He sat up slowly, stiff from sleeping on the ground, but not complaining. He had chosen this place, where everything changed, to remind himself that redemption must be walked, not merely whispered. He gathered his things, placed a hand on the weathered cross, and whispered, "Today, I'll make it count." Kaya was already waiting by the shoreline. She breached once, then twice, before submerging. Her movements, now familiar, no longer startled him. She didn't need to speak. Her presence said enough. Elias rowed back into deeper waters, not to fish, but to watch, to study the sea. He was mapping something larger than currents now. He was mapping trust. But the ocean had moods of its own. By midday, the wind began to howl through the air like a warning. The surface of the sea darkened. The seagulls that usually circled above vanished inland. A storm was coming. And fast. Elias turned his boat, ready to head back to harbor, but Kaya leapt in front of the bow and turned toward the open sea. She looked back, her eyes locking with his, beckoning. "What are you trying to show me?" he muttered, brow furrowed. The wind grew stronger. Waves slapped the hull like open palms. Still, he followed. Because Kaya had never led him astray. Minutes turned to hours. The boat groaned under the weight of the wind. Rain began to fall, not soft and forgiving, but cold, sharp. The sky broke open, thunder cracking like bones in the dark. And then he saw it. A small fishing boat, half sunk, drifting helplessly. Someone was aboard. Elias's heart leapt. He rowed harder. The waves were now monstrous, but Kaya circled the foundering boat, almost as if she were protecting it. She disappeared beneath the surface, then reappeared moments later beside Elias's vessel, nudging the side. Closer, faster. Elias managed to toss a rope and pull the drowning boy aboard. He was no older than 12, blue-lipped, eyes wide, with terror, clinging to Elias like he was salvation itself. "Thank you," the boy stammered, barely able to speak. Elias looked toward the storm, and then toward Kaya, still circling. "Don't thank me," he said softly, eyes misting. "Thank her." He steered them both back toward shore, rowing against the fury of the sea. Kaya remained beside them until the rocks of the harbor were visible once more, then vanished beneath the waves. Elias never saw her leave. But he felt it. That night, after bringing the boy home to a panicked mother, Elias returned to the cove, alone again, wet, exhausted, and overwhelmed. He sat in the boat, listening to the sea calm itself. The storm had passed, but something in him had swelled with it. Kaya didn't just save him from guilt. She had turned him into a savior, and every storm from now on would carry her shadow. Days passed since the storm. The village, small and salt-worn, buzzed with quiet reverence. Word had spread quickly, of the old fisherman who braved the wrath of the sea to save a boy, of the mysterious dolphin that never left his side. Some called it luck, others, divine mercy. But Elias knew. It was Kaya. He sat by the shore that morning, line in the water, but not fishing. Not really. The sea wasn't just a source of sustenance anymore. It had become a confessional. A place where pain was heard and sometimes, just sometimes, answered. He watched the horizon. For a fin. For a sign. But Kaya didn't return. Not that day. Nor the one after. The boy he saved, Daniel, began visiting him. At first out of gratitude, then curiosity, and soon, affection. Elias hadn't expected it, but something softened inside him each time Daniel sat beside him, legs dangling over the dock. "Did you really understand the dolphin?" Daniel asked once, eyes wide. Elias gave a half-smile. "I didn't need to understand. She did." Then one morning, while they mended a torn net, Daniel asked, "Why did she help you?" Elias stared at the frayed rope in his hands. "Because I failed her." He told Daniel everything, of the day he pulled in too much, too fast, of the moment he realized what he had done, when the dolphin's body lay limp and lifeless, tangled, in his greed, of the eyes that watched from a distance, the mate who never left, who returned day after day, Kaya. "I expected revenge," Elias said quietly, "but she gave me purpose." Daniel was silent for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Maybe she saw something good in you." Elias swallowed a lump in his throat. That night, Elias dreamed. He stood at the edge of the sea. But it wasn't storming or silent. It sang. A strange, haunting melody. In the dream, Kaya surfaced, not as a dolphin, but as something greater, like the soul of the sea itself. She didn't speak. She just looked at him. And in that gaze, Elias felt every sorrow melt. When he awoke, the melody still rang in his ears. And that day, for the first time in weeks, Kaya returned. She broke the surface at dawn, only for a second, long enough for Elias to see her fin, to know she was still watching, still guiding, still forgiving. The days after Kaya's disappearance seemed endless for Elias. The once serene and familiar ocean that had been his lifelong companion now felt like a cold and indifferent expanse. It was as if the very sea, which had provided so much, had suddenly turned against him. The rhythmic slapping of the waves against the boat, which used to comfort him, now filled him with an unsettling emptiness. The guilt that had initially hovered over him like a cloud now felt more like a weight, one that He could not escape. He had killed Kaya's mate in the net, and the ripple of that action seemed to stretch through the very fabric of his life. As the days passed, Elias struggled to find peace in the stillness of the sea. His fishing boats returned empty more often than not, and the old rhythm of the tides seemed to have abandoned him. It wasn't just the absence of Kaya that troubled him. It was the silence. He was no longer hearing the familiar clicks, the calls, the signs that the dolphins had once given him. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, Elias would climb aboard his boat and sail out. He hoped to find something, a glimmer of Kaya's spirit, a sign that she hadn't completely left him behind. The wind would tug at his hair, and the salt of the sea would sting his skin. But it was all background noise compared to the overwhelming quiet he now carried in his chest. One morning, as Elias cast his net, something caught his eye. A ripple in the water, a splash, a movement just beyond his boat. His heart leaped in his chest. Could it be? Could Kaya have returned? But no, this was different. Through his binoculars, Elias saw the form of a young dolphin, small, sleek, and alone. It was swimming in tight, desperate circles, as though trying to find its way. Elias felt his throat tighten, realizing that the dolphin was not just lost, it was panicked. The creature's movements were erratic, and it appeared to be in distress. Elias acted quickly. He lowered the net, not to trap the dolphin, but to offer a sanctuary. The sea had been cruel to the young one, just as it had been to him. The dolphin hesitated for a moment, then swam toward the boat, its movements slow and uncertain. Elias held his breath as it circled beneath the hull, clearly searching for something. The boat rocked slightly as the dolphin swam under it. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the dolphin broke the surface, letting out a series of high-pitched chirps. The sound echoed across the water, as if calling for help. Elias felt a strange sense of familiarity in the cry. Something about the way it resonated in the air reminded him of Kaya. But this was not Kaya. This was a new creature. A baby. Fragile. Lost. With great care, Elias maneuvered the boat so the dolphin could follow him. He adjusted the net to ensure the young creature had a place to rest. It was clear the dolphin was exhausted. He could see the way it clung to the boat, trying to stay afloat, but it had no strength left. As Elias sailed back toward the shore, he found his thoughts clouded with questions. Why had this young dolphin appeared? Was it Kaya's way of reaching out from beyond the depths? Or was this simply a new chapter in his redemption, a chance to make amends? He couldn't be sure. But as the dolphin followed him in silence, Elias knew that something profound was unfolding. The dolphin stayed close to the boat the entire journey back. It was clear that it had no intention of leaving Elias's side. By the time he reached the shore, the sun had begun to dip low in the sky. Elias knew he had to care for the creature. He couldn't leave it alone. He named it Echo. That night, Elias placed the dolphin in a makeshift pen by the water's edge. He didn't want to risk it swimming away, not when it was so vulnerable. The creature was still too weak to fend for itself. As the moonlight danced on the surface of the water, Elias sat on the shore beside Echo, his mind swirling with thoughts. Was this his penance for what he had done to Kaya? Was this dolphin a sign, a second chance at redemption? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. He had made a promise to himself long ago that he would never again turn his back on the sea. And now he would not turn his back on the creatures who called it home. Weeks passed. The villagers had grown accustomed to seeing the young dolphin near Elias's home. It was an odd sight, one that stirred both wonder and curiosity in those who caught glimpses of it. The dolphin, Echo, as Elias had named it, was a silent companion. It followed him wherever he went, swimming beside his boat whenever he ventured out into the sea, its presence as much a part of the landscape as the cliffs or the waves. But despite the creature's quiet acceptance of his company, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Echo was not Kaya, and every time Elias looked out to the horizon, he found himself yearning for the powerful and graceful presence of the dolphin he had lost. There was no sense of closure, only the ache of regret. One evening, as Elias sat by the fire with his old fishing nets mended and waiting to be used again, he found himself lost in thought. Echo was resting on the shore, still weak but stronger each day. Elias had learned that he could never truly understand the ocean or its creatures, but the one thing that had been undeniable in the months that followed Kaya's death was the bond he had with them, particularly with Echo. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. Elias looked up to find Daniel, the young boy who had once been saved in the storm, standing at the threshold. His eyes were wide with worry. "Elias, you have to come. There's a storm coming." "They say it's the worst one they've seen in years," Daniel said, his voice shaking. Elias stood up quickly, his heart thundering in his chest. He hadn't been out on the water in weeks. The storm had been building on the horizon for days, and now it was finally here. He grabbed his coat, his boots, and his fishing lantern. "The boat," Elias muttered to himself. The thought of Echo out there alone in the growing storm sent a chill through him. He didn't wait for Daniel to follow. He ran to the dock, where his boat was anchored, but before he could untie it, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a dolphin, a massive one, swimming toward the shore with incredible speed. Elias's heart leaped. It wasn't just Echo. This was something larger, something older. The dolphin broke the surface of the water and gave a cry that echoed across the sea. The wind howled as if in response, and Elias felt a surge of hope. Could this be Kaya? Without hesitation, Elias climbed into the boat and cast off, sailing toward the powerful creature. The wind whipped around him, but he didn't feel it. All he could hear was the beat of his heart and the steady splash of the waves against the boat. He didn't look back. The wind roared in Elias's ears as he pushed forward, the boat slicing through the furious waves that seemed to rise higher with every passing moment. His knuckles were white from gripping the oars so tightly, but his focus was unwavering. The figure in the water, the dolphin, had become a beacon, a light guiding him through the overwhelming chaos of the storm. Elias barely noticed the thick clouds that were now swirling above him, blocking out the moon. The ocean, usually calm and predictable, had transformed into a wild, untamable force. Waves crashed with violent power, threatening to capsize his small boat at any moment, but still, he rowed on, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of the dolphin ahead. The closer he got, the more he could make out its shape, large and imposing, with a sleek body that cut through the water with purpose. The dolphin's movements were graceful but urgent. It seemed to be calling him, leading him into the heart of the storm as if it knew what was to come. Elias's heart raced. He couldn't help but wonder if this was Kaya, the dolphin he had killed, coming back for him, or was this something else entirely, something even more ancient and powerful than he could comprehend. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the storm intensified. The winds howled like wolves, and the rain fell in sheets, turning the sea into a churning abyss. Elias could barely see anything through the sheets of rain. The boat was tossed violently, and for a moment he thought he was going to lose control. But then, just as suddenly as the storm had appeared, the dolphin surged forward. It dived beneath the surface, and then re-emerged with a powerful leap, its body arching high above the waves. The force of its movement sent a spray of water into the air, and Elias felt the boat lurch forward, propelled by some unseen force. He didn't hesitate. He followed the dolphin, trusting it completely, even though the storm continued to rage around him. The world felt like it was closing in. Torrential rain, thunder crashing overhead, waves rising like mountains. Elias fought to keep the boat on course, but with every moment, it felt like the sea was conspiring to tear him apart. Then, just when Elias thought he could take no more, the dolphin leaped again, this time with such force that it cleared the waves entirely and vanished into the mist. Elias's heart skipped a beat. It had disappeared. Had it been guiding him or merely leading him to his death? The storm, which had seemed to be pushing him forward, now felt like it was pulling him back, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. Suddenly, there was a flash of light. A thunderbolt split the sky, illuminating the water for just a brief second. And in that moment, Elias saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive shadow emerged from the depths of the ocean, and at its heart, radiating a ghostly glow, was Kaya. The spirit of the dolphin he had killed, but transformed into something greater, something ethereal and powerful. Elias could see it clearly now, its dark, almost translucent form floating above the water like a guardian spirit. It was watching him with an expression of deep sorrow, but also understanding. Elias gasped as he realized that this was no mere trick of the storm. The dolphin he had killed had returned. Not in body, but in spirit. Kaya had come back not to haunt him, but to guide him through the storm, to help him face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: hope. The storm, which had seemed so overwhelming moments before, now felt less like a force of nature and more like a test. He had been given this second chance, this opportunity to make things right, and he couldn't let it slip away. The glow of Kaya's spirit illuminated the sea around him, showing him the way forward. The storm began to subside, slowly at first, and then with increasing speed. The waves calmed, the winds quieted, and the rain fell away, leaving nothing but the soft lapping of the water against the boat. Elias reached out a trembling hand, but Kaya, her spirit, was already fading, disappearing into the sea, her form dissolving into the night sky like smoke. But before she vanished completely, Elias heard her voice. Soft, like the whisper of the wind. "You are forgiven." Tears blurred his vision, and for the first time in a long time, Elias felt the weight of his guilt lift. He had been given a gift, one that was more precious than any treasure the sea could offer, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered. The morning sky was clear, and the once churning sea had calmed, leaving behind a tranquil surface that sparkled in the early light. Elias stood at the edge of the water, his heart heavy, with the realization that everything had changed. The ocean had taken much from him, but it had also returned something more precious than he could have imagined. As he looked out at the horizon, he felt a strange peace settle over him. He hadn't realized how deep his guilt had run until he had seen Kaya's spirit, until he had understood that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had ever imagined. Elias knew now that he couldn't undo the past, but he could honor Kaya's spirit, and he could make sure the dolphins, her family, were never forgotten. He had been given a second chance, not only with Echo, but with the sea itself. "Thank you," Elias whispered to the winds. "Thank you for showing me the way." He turned back to the boat, where Echo was waiting. The young dolphin had grown stronger over the past few weeks, and Elias had come to think of him as a symbol of his redemption. Echo was not Kaya, but the bond they shared was just as powerful. The dolphin swam up beside the boat, his sleek body cutting through the water as he circled the boat with graceful movements. Elias reached out a hand and stroked Echo's smooth back. The dolphin didn't hesitate. He nuzzled Elias gently, his eyes full of trust. Elias knew now that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would honor the sea, its creatures, and the lessons they had taught him. He had learned that redemption didn't come easily, but it was possible. And it wasn't just about saving others, it was about saving yourself, learning to forgive, and making things right. As Elias sailed back to shore, Echo by his side, he knew that the sea would never be the same again, and neither would he. Elias's return to shore was marked by a calmness that had eluded him for so long. The village, with its fishing nets and creaking boats, seemed almost foreign to him now. It had been weeks since he'd last set foot on land, and the faces of the villagers, which he had once known so well, now seemed distant. He was no longer the man he had been when he had left. As the boat touched the shore, Elias looked down at Echo, who swam alongside him with the ease of a creature born for the sea. The dolphin had been his constant companion through the storm, his symbol of redemption. And in that moment, Elias felt a deep sense of responsibility, not only to Echo, but to the entire ocean and its creatures. The villagers had gathered by the water, watching him return. There were whispers in the air, but Elias knew they weren't just speaking of his long absence. There were more eyes upon him now, eyes that had watched him go out and fail, and now they were watching to see if he had returned a man reborn. His heart thumped in his chest, but he stood tall. Among the crowd was Eliza, a woman he had known since childhood. She had always watched over him with a knowing look, one that seemed to see into his very soul. She was waiting for him at the edge of the water, her eyes soft with concern. As Elias stepped from the boat, he felt a lump form in his throat, but he didn't look away. "Eliza," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze filled with a mixture of emotions, relief, sorrow, and something else, something he couldn't quite place. Then, her eyes softened, and she smiled. "You came back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know if I'd see you again." "I had to," Elias said, glancing down at Echo. "I couldn't leave it like that. Not after everything." Eliza's eyes followed his, and for a moment she didn't speak. She seemed to be measuring something in the air, something that had changed within Elias. Finally, she took a step forward, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "You've changed," she said simply. "But you still have a long way to go. The village needs you." Elias nodded. The weight of her words settled on him, and he realized she was right. His journey hadn't ended. The storm had passed, but its effects would linger, and there were still people here who needed him. With a sigh, Elias looked down at the boat, where Echo had settled alongside him, waiting. It was as though the Dolphin understood the shift in the air, the way everything was moving toward a new beginning. The sea had given him a second chance, but it was up to him to make the most of it. And he couldn't do that if he stayed hidden away from the people who needed him. "You're right," he said, his voice firming with newfound resolve. "I have a lot of work to do." As if on cue, the Dolphin let out a soft, melodic whistle, a sound that seemed to reverberate in the air and stir something deep within Elias's chest. It was a reminder that the ocean wasn't done with him yet, and neither was he done with it. "Eliza," he said, his voice steady. "I'm going to start by fixing the damage I've done. I'll teach the villagers, help them understand. I won't let the sea and its creatures be forgotten." She nodded, a slow, approving smile forming on her lips. "That's a start." In the days that followed, Elias found himself busier than ever. He worked with the villagers, teaching them about the importance of preserving the ocean, of respecting the creatures that called it home. It wasn't easy. Many were still skeptical, unwilling to believe in the lessons Elias had learned during his time alone at sea. But with every lesson he imparted, with every word he spoke, Elias could feel the weight of his redemption growing heavier, more real. Meanwhile, Echo became a symbol of hope and change for the village. The villagers, who had once viewed the Dolphin with distrust, began to see him as Elias did, an ally, a friend, and a reminder of the power of forgiveness. As the weeks went by, the village began to transform. The nets, once filled with the catch of the day, were now being used for different purposes. Elias and the villagers worked together to build safer methods of fishing, to ensure that the sea would continue to provide for them without causing harm to its creatures. But there were still struggles to face, still scars to heal. The villagers, though they respected Elias's knowledge, had trouble letting go of their old ways. Some still believed that the sea was a harsh and unforgiving force, a place where survival was everything, and nothing else mattered. One evening, as Elias stood at the edge of the shore, watching Echo and the other dolphins swim in the distance, Eliza joined him. She stood beside him in silence for a moment before speaking. "You've done well," she said, "but there's more work to be done. The world isn't always as forgiving as the ocean." Elias turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I know, but maybe that's the lesson. The world can be forgiving, if we're willing to change. The sea taught me that. It doesn't forget the past, but it allows us to move forward." Eliza looked out at the water, a smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe you're right. The ocean has a way of teaching, doesn't it?" Elias nodded, watching the dolphins leap from the water in a dance of joy. He could hear their calls, their laughter, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the world was in harmony. It wasn't perfect, not yet. But with each passing day, Elias felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He had found his way back to the sea, to the dolphins, and to the redemption that had once seemed so out of reach. And as he watched Echo disappear into the horizon, he knew that his journey was far from over. There was still much to be done, still many lessons to be learned. But now, with a heart full of gratitude and hope, Elias was ready to face whatever came next. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, as Elias sat by the shore, lost in thought. The wind, though gentle, carried with it the scent of salt and the whisper of memories long buried. He had learned so much during his time with Echo, but there were still moments when doubt crept into his mind, moments when he questioned if the changes he had worked so hard for were enough. As the days passed, Elias found himself confronting not just the ocean's challenges but also the shadows of his past. His relationship with his father, once a bond built on shared labor and mutual respect, had fractured in the years before his disappearance. His father had always been a man of the sea, stoic, unyielding, and focused on survival above all else. But Elias had learned through Echo that survival wasn't enough. There had to be something more. One evening, as Elias prepared his boat for another trip, Eliza approached him, her face somber. She had seen the change in him, the way he had grown more reflective, more pensive as the days went on, and she knew that the ocean wasn't the only thing he had been struggling with. "You're still carrying the weight of it all, aren't you?" she asked quietly, standing beside him. Elias didn't respond at first, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The waves lapped gently against the shore, as though urging him to let go of the burden that weighed on him so heavily. Finally, he spoke. "I thought I could outrun it. The guilt, the loss. But it's still here, Eliza. In the silence of the night, in the stillness of the ocean. It's impossible to ignore." Eliza placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than most ever would. You've changed this village, Elias. You've given the ocean back its voice." Elias shook his head. "It's not enough. I need to face what I've left behind." There was a long silence between them as the waves continued their eternal rhythm. Finally, Eliza spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Then go, Elias. Go to the place where your past lives. Face what you need to face. But know this. No matter where you go, we're here. You don't have to carry it alone." Her words echoed in Elias's mind as he set off in his boat the next day, Echo swimming alongside him. This time, however, he wasn't heading into the open sea. He was heading to the small cove where he had grown up, where his father's house still stood, weathered and worn by time. As he reached the cove, a sense of dread settled over him. It was the same place he had once found comfort. But now it seemed like a distant memory, one he wasn't sure he wanted to relive. He anchored his boat near the shore, the sound of the water lapping against the hull a stark contrast to the pounding of his heart. The house stood at the edge of the cliffs, its windows dark and lifeless. The years had not been kind to it, but it still held the memories of his father, the fishing nets, the worn ropes, the smell of salt and wood. It was all still there, as if frozen in time. Elias walked toward the house, his steps slow and heavy. As he entered the familiar doorway, memories flooded back. His father's stern gaze, the long hours spent mending nets, the silence that had often hung between them. He had never understood his father's rigid approach to life, but now, standing in the place where his father had once stood, Elias saw it all in a new light. His father had been trying to protect him, to prepare him for the harsh realities of the sea. But Elias had been too proud, too stubborn to understand. It wasn't until Echo had shown him the true meaning of survival and redemption that Elias realized the value of the lessons his father had tried to impart. Elias sat down on the old wooden floor, his back against the wall. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the weight of the past, the mistakes, the regrets, the lost time. But as the sun began to set, he felt something else. A sense of peace. Echo appeared at the door, his sleek form outlined against the fading light. Elias stood and walked toward the dolphin, who let out a soft, melodic whistle, as if offering comfort. "I've spent so many years running, Echo," Elias whispered. "But now, I'm here. I'm ready to face everything." The dolphin nudged him gently, as if understanding the depth of his words. Elias smiled, the first real smile he had worn in what felt like a lifetime. He had come here to confront his past, but what he had found was the beginning of his future. Days passed, and Elias found himself returning to the village with a sense of clarity he hadn't known in years. The weight of his past had not disappeared, but it no longer felt insurmountable. His time with Echo had given him the strength to forgive himself, to understand that redemption was not a destination, but a journey that required facing the truth, no matter how difficult. As he worked alongside the villagers, rebuilding the relationship between them and the ocean, Elias began to see the beauty in the small things. The laughter of children as they played by the water, the steady rhythm of the fishermen's nets, the way the ocean seemed to respond to the care and respect they had begun to show it. But there was still one last lesson to be learned, and it came in the form of a storm. One evening, as the wind began to pick up and dark clouds gathered on the horizon, Elias knew that a tempest was coming. It was the kind of storm that could tear apart boats and shatter the peace they had worked so hard to build. He watched as the villagers hurried to secure their homes and their boats, but deep down, he knew that this was the final test. Echo swam alongside him, his presence a reminder that the sea had a way of testing those who dared to live in harmony with it. The dolphin had never left Elias's side, always watching over him, always guiding him. And now, as the storm approached, Elias knew that Echo would be there to help him through it. But this time, Elias wasn't alone in facing the storm. The villagers were with him, and together they would face whatever the ocean had in store. The sky above darkened as if the heavens themselves were preparing to unleash their fury. The wind howled, a primal, gut-wrenching sound that seemed to echo the fear of the villagers. It wasn't just any storm, it was a storm like none Elias had ever seen. The waves were already rising, crashing against the shores, their violent roars mixing with the shrieking gusts of wind. In the distance, the dark clouds appeared like a wall, an unrelenting force that seemed to approach with an inevitable purpose. Elias stood on the edge of the village, his hands gripping the weathered railing as the storm grew ever nearer. His thoughts were no longer on the past, they were on the present. The village, the people, Echo, they were his responsibility now. He wasn't just a fisherman anymore, he was a protector of something far greater. Beside him, the villagers worked frantically to secure the boats and shelters, their movement swift and practiced. But there was a collective sense of helplessness in the air. The sea, in all its beauty, could also be a fierce, unforgiving beast, and tonight, it was showing its teeth. Elias felt a sense of calm wash over him as Echo appeared, cutting through the dark waters, his sleek form cutting through the waves like a shadow. The dolphin swam toward Elias, his eyes meeting the fisherman's, as if offering a silent promise. Elias knew, without words, that Echo was ready for whatever the storm might bring. As the winds picked up, the villagers scrambled to their boats, some of them braving the choppy waters to secure what they could. Elias turned to Eliza, her face pale from fear, but there was strength in her eyes. "You'll be all right," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "I'll keep them safe," Elias promised. With one last look at the village, Elias stepped into his boat. The storm was upon them now, its winds fierce and relentless. The sky crackled with electricity, and the first wave of rain lashed down upon him like 1,000 needles. But he didn't hesitate. He had learned to trust the ocean, to trust Echo. Together they had already defied the odds once. Now, they would do it again. As he steered the boat into the heart of the storm, the waves rose higher, crashing against his hull with a deafening roar. The boat creaked and groaned under the pressure, but Elias held firm, his hands steady on the wheel. His eyes never left Echo, who swam alongside the boat, guiding it with a sense of purpose that seemed almost otherworldly. The storm grew fiercer still. Waves as tall as the trees crashed against the boat, sending torrents of water over the sides. Elias fought with every ounce of strength in his body to keep the boat afloat, but it was clear that the sea was testing him, testing all of them. The storm was a reminder that nature could be both beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. In the midst of the chaos, Elias could hear a voice in his mind, a voice that wasn't his own. It was his father's voice, the voice of the man who had taught him everything he knew about the sea. "You must face the storm, Elias," his father's voice said, cutting through the roar of the wind. "You must never turn your back on it. Not now. Not ever." The words were a balm to his soul, a reminder of the lessons he had learned, of the legacy he had inherited. His father had been right. The storm wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be respected. And if he respected it, he could overcome it. With renewed determination, Elias tightened his grip on the wheel, steering the boat into the heart of the storm. The waves crashed higher, and the winds howled like a pack of wolves. But Elias didn't falter. His heart raced, his mind focused, but his soul was at peace. Echo stayed with him, guiding the way, his presence unwavering. It was as though the Dolphin knew exactly where to lead him, and Elias, in turn, knew that he had to trust Echo as he had never trusted anything before. The storm raged on for what felt like hours, each minute stretching into an eternity. The boat tossed and turned on the waves, each creak and groan of the wood a reminder of how close they were to being overwhelmed. But through it all, Echo stayed by his side, the Dolphin never leaving, his presence a steadying force in the midst of the chaos. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm started to subside. The winds died down, the waves lost their fury, and the rain turned to a soft drizzle. Elias looked up at the sky, his heart still pounding, but a sense of relief washing over him. The storm had passed. The night was still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. Echo swam beside the boat, his form silhouetted against the now calm waters. Elias reached out a hand, his fingers grazing the cool surface of the ocean. "You did it, Echo," Elias whispered, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. The Dolphin let out a soft, melodic whistle, as if in response before swimming off into the distance. Elias watched as the last traces of the storm faded, the moonlight now casting a soft glow on the tranquil sea. He had survived. The village had survived. And with Echo by his side, he knew that there was nothing they couldn't face together. As the sun rose the following morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elias returned to the village. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the village was left standing. The boats had weathered the storm, the homes had held firm, and the people were safe. It was a victory, but it wasn't just a victory of survival. It was a victory of spirit, of unity, and of the deep bond that had formed between the villagers and the ocean. Elias docked his boat on the shore, his heart still racing from the events of the night before. He could hear the voices of the villagers in the distance, their voices filled with relief and gratitude. They had been through a trial together, and now they had emerged stronger than ever. Eliza was waiting for him at the dock, her face illuminated by the morning light. She ran to him as he stepped ashore, her arms wrapping around him in a tight embrace. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You kept us all safe." Elias smiled, his heart swelling with pride and love for the village he had come to protect. But there was one thing he knew for certain. He hadn't done it alone. Echo swam into view, his sleek form cutting through the water like a shadow. Elias turned to the Dolphin, his heart full of gratitude. "You were with me the whole time," Elias said, his voice filled with awe. "Thank you." Echo let out a soft whistle, his eyes meeting Elias's in a way that seemed to speak volumes. It wasn't just a bond between man and dolphin. It was a bond of understanding, of shared purpose. The Dolphin had saved him, just as Elias had saved the ocean. Together, they had created something far greater than the sum of their parts. As the villagers gathered on the shore, Elias turned to face them. They were looking at him with admiration and respect, their eyes filled with a quiet understanding. The storm had tested them all, But it had also shown them something important: the power of unity, the strength of the human spirit, and the deep, unbreakable bond between man and nature. And as the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the ocean, Elias knew that this was just the beginning. The village had found peace, but the journey didn't end here. There was more to be done, more to protect, more to learn. But for now, Elias stood on the shore, his heart full, his soul at peace. The ocean had tested him, and he had passed, and as long as he had Echo by his side, there was nothing that could ever break their bond.